Welcome, selamat pagi dan selamat sore. Good morning in Indonesia and good afternoon in Melbourne. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Tim Lindsay and I am Director of the Centre for Indonesian Law, Islam and Society here in Melbourne Melbourne Law School, which is the only centre devoted to Indonesian law in the world outside Indonesia. Today's seminar is presented by SILIS in partnership with the Indonesia at Melbourne blog, which is hosted by SILIS. Indonesia at Melbourne gives opinions from Indonesians and others around the world about events in Indonesia, and we encourage you to come and read our articles. You'll see the link in the chat. Let me now begin by acknowledging that Melbourne Law School stands on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nations, and I pay our respects to their elders past and present, and I recognise the traditional owners of the lands on which other presenters today may be standing, and of course participants as well. Bapak-bapak, ibu-ibu, Indonesia's controversial new president, former General Prabowo Subianto, comes to power with a strong popular mandate after a landslide victory and has built an enormous governing coalition, reflecting his desire to rule without opposition. But he has a dark past, with allegations of human rights violations, and he has made his dislike of liberal democracy very clear on a number of occasions. Some observers praise Prabowo's nationalism and his enthusiasm for developmentalism, but others fear he may return Indonesia to an authoritarian model like that built by his one-time father-in-law, Soeharto. And indeed, his party's website talks about a return to the pre-amendment 1945 constitution. Today in this seminar, we have a collection of prominent scholars and activists who will offer their analysis of what the next 5 years of Prabowo's rule might be like. In fact, we are lucky enough to have 5 outstanding speakers joining us today. And we're particularly grateful to our Indonesian speakers because, of course, it's a holiday in Indonesia today for the Pilkada, the first joint regional elections. Thank you for giving up your holidays and joining us. So our speakers, I'll introduce our Indonesian speakers first, seeing they're the ones that have lost their holiday. Usman Hamid is Executive Director of Amnesty International Indonesia, founder of Public Virtue ID, and a lecturer at Indonesia's Jentera School of Law. Professor Susi Dwi Harijanti. Ibu Susi has been a professor of constitutional law at UNPAD, Universitas Padjadjaran, since 2018. She is a Melbourne alumni with a PhD degree from Melbourne Law School in 2011. She works on comparative constitutional law, the law of the Constitution, human rights, citizen and migration law, among other things. Ibu Fauzia Mayangsari. Ibu Maya is a researcher, also at Amnesty International Indonesia, and her academic interests include protest movements, social movements, and human rights in Indonesia, civil society in general. Turning to our Australian contributors, Associate Professor Nadir Shah Hossain. Nadir is Associate Professor here in the Melbourne Law School and Deputy Director of our Centre for Indonesian Law, Islam and Society. He is also heavily involved, of course, in Indonesia and is an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Law at Universitas Hasanuddin. And Ari Hermawan. Pak Ari is current editor of Indonesia at Melbourne and a PhD candidate in the Asia Institute at this university. Almost finished, yeah, Pak Ari, almost. We're very grateful to have him with us because he's previously worked as a managing editor and editor at large of Indonesia's leading English language daily, the Jakarta Post. He is also a co-founder and contributing editor of the public journalism initiative, Project Multatuli. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. We look forward to your insights. Before we begin, a little bit about how we will run today. A reminder that each of our presenters has 20 minutes, and there will be a timer in the corner of your screen. So speakers, please look and see that timer when your session starts. I will warn you as well when 5 minutes are up and when your time is up. It's important to stick to time limits today. For our participants, thank you also for joining us. You will have an opportunity to ask questions of the speakers once they have all presented. We'll have a discussion session. To ask questions, could you please put your questions in the Q&A box? You can start doing that whenever you like, and we will go through them when we get to the discussion session. And of course, our panelists are also welcome to ask questions too, directly, verbally of each other, but we'll come to that later with our discussion session. Now, I think it's time for us to get started. Thank you once again to all our speakers and to all our participants. Our first speaker is Pak Usman Hamid, and from Amnesty International, and he'll be talking on the very hot topic of President Prabowo and human rights. What is likely to happen in the next 5 years? Pak Usman, silakan.
Thank you so much, Pak Tim. If I may, please allow me to be one of the co-hosts so that I could share my PowerPoint. It's an unfinished PowerPoint, but I'll do my best to, to structure my presentation. First of all, thank you so much for Pak Tim, and thanks for everyone for joining. I think today is a voting day, so happy pencoblosan. So thanks again, Pak Tim, for having me. And today I'd like to talk about the human rights under Prabowo's rule, and this would means that I'll do my best to offer my analysis of what the next 5 years will be like under Prabowo's rule from a human rights point of view. So I'd like to organize my talk by, organizing it into 4 to 6 points as an outline. First of all, I'd like to set the scene, a background of Indonesian political context, and then I'll start exploring 4 issues. Justice for past abuses, and secondly, civic space for criticisms and public protests, and thirdly, human rights in Papua, and lastly, religious minority protection in Indonesia. And of course, I'll close my talk with some notes on as a conclusion. So let me start with the set the scene of the context. I think before discussing these 4 issues that I mentioned earlier, it is important to note that the context of Indonesia, as we know, has been, the decline of democracy. It is indisputably in decline, particularly in light of the recent inauguration of Prabowo Subianto and Gibran Rakabuming Raka as Indonesia's new president and vice president. Prabowo, as we know, a former military general accused of rights abuses and war crimes committed during Soeharto's New Order, and Gibran, ex-President Jokowi's son, who was shoehorned into the position of last-minute or by last-minute changes to electoral legislation. And these also are symbols of Jokowi dynasty's ambition. If we look at the index of world justice rule of law, it has consistently ranked Indonesia below the global average for the last 10 years. Indonesia has been ranked by World Justice Projects in the first year of Jokowi's presidency, for example, 46 globally. And then in the last year of Jokowi's rule, it had declined into 66th place out of 140 countries. While Freedom House Index shows a declining score in the last 10 years and poor ratings due to persisting systemic corruption, ongoing conflict, and unlawful killing in Papua, discrimination against minority, and also continuous politicized use of defamation and blasphemy law by the authorities. Now let me move into the first topic of human rights, which I'd like to explore in order to see what the next 5 years will be like under Prabowo's rule. So I believe and I argue that Prabowo's rule will not likely bring any change on human rights and will bring no difference compared to Jokowi's rule. In other words, Prabowo and Jokowi are the two sides of the same coin when it comes to human rights. As we know, Jokowi's key ministers are Prabowo's ministers, with, of course, more individuals coming from military and police backgrounds, including those linked to human rights abuses. And, you know, if we compare with Jokowi's promises to address past human rights abuses was a cornerstone, and it was featured prominently in his national priorities. Meanwhile, Prabowo it was part of the dark past, implicated in past human rights abuses, and still in full denial of his involvement. And reflecting back to Jokowi, despite promises, Jokowi's actions have often spoken louder than his words. He formed controversial alliances with former military figures and politicians linked to human rights abuses. Apart from appointing General Wiranto, Jokowi appointed Prabowo, and Prabowo was among one of those implicated generals in human rights abuses appointed by Jokowi. Jokowi and Prabowo's failure to provide a clear human rights policy has been coupled with these alliances or assignment of figures with questionable human rights records to key positions such as Defense Minister Shafri Shamsuddin. So if Jokowi appointed Prabowo as, you know, Minister of Defense, now Prabowo appointed Shafri Shamsuddin, who was responsible for the May riot in 1998, as a defense minister as well. And worse, you know, one of the top senior ministers of Prabowo, Yusril Iza Mahendra, a conservative politician, has denied of what happens in the 1998 as a gross human rights violation. Yusril said there were none of those in the last couple of decades. Maybe they happened during the colonial times in the early days of our independence. Yusril not only denied that the 1998 is a gross human rights violation, but also the whole period of Soeharto, according to him, that did not have any records of what we call gross human rights violation. 1998 means at least 3 series of gross human rights violations. One is political kidnappings against activists, pro-democracy activists. Thirdly, a series of systematic riots taking place in Jakarta, Solo, Medan, and other cities. So while Jokowi has fallen short of fulfilling his pledges to uphold human rights, Prabowo did not promise anything on human rights. His inauguration speech did not even mention the word human rights, and his ministers denied. Prabowo had asked could
Usman, your internet's breaking up.
July 1996.
Usman, we're not hearing you. Your internet's breaking up. I think we've lost Usman for the moment. We'll just wait for a minute or two to see if he can rejoin us. Okay, it looks like we have lost connection with Usman. I think what we might do is go straight to our next speaker, and if Usman can reconnect, we will return to him after that. So, Nadir, would you be ready to start straight away?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just introduce Associate Professor Nadir Shah Hussain, the Deputy Director of SILIS on Prabowo's FAT Cabinet.
Okay, thank you, Pak Tim. I want to make a joke about the disappearance of Pak Usman, but I think it's too dangerous, so let me keep my joke for myself. Okay, so hello everyone. Please accept my apology that I did not prepare traditional PowerPoint slides for these presentations because I want to focus on connecting with you directly. My goal is to deliver my points clearly in under 20 minutes, making them hopefully powerful enough. That's why I don't need PowerPoint slides. So, and hopefully we'll have a meaningful conversation at the end. So, as you are aware, on the 20th October, Indonesia welcomed a new chapter as President Prabowo Subianto took office, unveiling the largest cabinet the nation has seen since 1966. And he named his cabinet as the Red and White Cabinet. And this administration boasts an unprecedented 109 members, including minister, vice minister, and agency heads. So today I will provide an analysis of this, what I call it, fat cabinet, and explore its potential strengths, challenges, and implications for the future of Indonesia. So I will offer 5 observations. So number 1, the rationale behind the fat cabinet. President Prabowo has called for a strong government capable of uniting Indonesia's multicultural society and political landscape. To achieve this, he has embraced an inclusive, accommodative approach, bringing together diverse political interests under one roof. However, critics are quick to point out that such inclusivity comes at a cost, financially and operationally. With 2 major parties, the PDIP and Nasdem, left out, the effectiveness of this coalition remains a pressing question. There is also a question about the lack of a strong opposition in the parliament. But we all know throughout Indonesian history and also through our understanding of the Indonesian checks and balances mechanism, Indonesia has never had a strong opposition anyway. Number 2, new structure, coordination, and complexity. A defining feature of the cabinet is the addition of 7 coordinating ministers, up from Jokowi's 4. These ministers are tasked with overseeing critical portfolios and supporting Vice President Gibran Rakabuming Raka, who is relatively inexperienced at national level. As we all know, he is a former mayor in a small town, Solo. While this could streamline decision-making, it also raises concerns about overlapping responsibilities and inefficiencies. President Prabowo must enforce clear lines of authority and foster collaboration to avoid confusion and turf wars among coordinating ministers. So, for instance, Kementerian Ekonomi Kreatif and Badan Ekonomi Kreatif is put under Menteri Koordinator Bidang Pemberdayaan Masyarakat, not under Menteri Koordinator Bidang Perekonomian. Or, both Kementerian Koperasi and Kementerian Usaha Mikro, Kecil, dan Menengah are put under Menteri Koordinator Bidang Pemberdayaan Masyarakat, not under Menteri Koordinator Bidang Perekonomian. So again, the choices here is a bit confusing. Point number 3, ministry restructuring focusing on specialization. Several ministries have been divided to create more specialized institutions. For example, the Ministry of Law and Human Rights now consists of 3 separate entities: Law, Human Rights, and Immigration. Similarly, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology has been divided into 3 distinct portfolios. Ministry of Religious Affairs also has been divided into the Ministry of Religious Affairs, the Hajj Agency, and the Halal Agency. This specialization has the potential to enhance focus and efficiency. However, it also introduces logistical challenges such as staffing, funding, and rebranding, which may delay progress in the short term. Minister of Human Rights, for instance, quickly asked for 20 trillion rupiahs, and he asked for more staff from 188 to 2,544 people. It's simply unrealistic. Number 4, elevation of agencies to ministries. Some agencies have been upgraded to ministries, signaling a shift in priorities. So like migrant workers protections. So the old agency, BP2MI, has been elevated to a ministry, highlighting the government's commitment to safeguarding the rights of Indonesian workers abroad. I welcome this initiative. I think this is a good sign of how President Prabowo thinks about the migrant workers. Hajj Management Agency, or BPH, now operating at the ministerial level. This agency underscores the importance of streamlining the Hajj pilgrimage for millions of Indonesians. And also, Halal Agency is separated from Ministry of Religious Affairs and became a separate body operating at the ministerial level. These moves demonstrate a willingness for President Prabowo to address specific needs, but they also require substantial resources and coordination to succeed. Take example of organizing Hajj next year. Last week, we learned that from the news, the Ministry of Religious Affairs still has significant role, as it is not easy to transfer all the powers, staff, regulation, resources to the new agency. Let alone the two new head agencies on Hajj and Halal are new actors who have no experience dealing with these two important issues. Number 5, challenges of a fat cabinet. The sheer size of this cabinet introduces several challenges. So, 1, bureaucratic complexity. With more ministers and deputy ministers, the risk of inefficiency and sectoral rivalries increases. In Indonesia, we call it ego-sectoral. Coordination will require significant time and adaptation. Realistically, 2 to 3 years before the system operates smoothly. So, my prediction is that this fat cabinet may be fully functioning around 2027. They will work at full capacity in 2028, but there will be a new election in 2029. So effectively, it's less than 2 years they can operate at full capacity. But if you think that this is a burden, you might be wrong, because when I spoke to Ring Satu of Prabowo, they said that they prepared Prabowo to run the country for 2 terms. So then, I don't know whether he got inspiration from Donald Trump, I don't know, or Mahathir Mohamad, but the way that he prepared the program is for 2 terms. So if I said that the cabinet, the Fed cabinet, will only work at full capacity in 2028, maybe he is aware of that. So we'll see whether he will be elected the 2nd term or whether Gibran will be the new president. I don't know. So financial burden, that's the second issues within my point of the challenges of a Fed cabinet. Financial burden. The estimated cost of maintaining this cabinet is around 1.9 trillion rupiah. So for instance, I heard that last week, there is still a competitions to have a new logo for the new ministries or coordinating ministries. So they think about how to make a new logo. And also when I asked where those three additional coordinating ministers office, well, they don't have their office yet. They don't have their staff yet. So one of them they stay in Menara BCA, so outside of the government buildings. I don't know who fund that, who provide those office. It will be interesting for the KPK to look at it. But I think that's a problem with the financial burdens. So 1.9 trillion, that's the expectation of 1.9 trillion rupiah, the expectation for the Fed cabinet to maintain this, excluding the setup costs for new offices and staffing. This strain on the national budget could lead to calls for fiscal reforms and reallocations. And we are still not sure whether Prabowo and his Fed cabinet will move to Ibu Kota Nusantara, to IKN or not. Because if they will move, then there will be another cost. The third point on these challenges is legislative adjustments. So with this Fed cabinet, the DPR, the parliament, must also adapt to oversee the expanded cabinet effectively, ensuring accountability and transparency in government. Okay, so how about the opportunities and the path forward? So despite these challenges, the red and white cabinet holds some potential. If managed effectively, its size and diversity could foster innovation through specialization, strengthen policies for critical sectors like labor rights and religious affairs, unite Indonesia's diverse political spectrum under a shared vision, what you call it, Astacita, and regular evaluations, feedback mechanisms, and transparent leadership will be key to unlocking this potential. So by prioritizing collaboration and accountability, President Prabowo's government can address these challenges head-on. So I'm trying to be a nice boy here, Pak Tim, because we have Pak Usman and Bu Maya. They'll be devil advocates for today. So, so the conclusions, President Prabowo has taken a bold step with the creation of this expansive cabinet. While its size may draw criticism, it also reflects a vision of inclusivity and specialization aimed at addressing Indonesia's complex needs. As the president himself said, the government's duty is to serve the people. So let us hope this administration rises to the occasion, steering Indonesia toward a brighter future. So good luck, Mr. President, and may you serve the people well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Nadia. You still have about 8 minutes left, so you've done very well to squeeze that in. Pak Usman is back with us again, so let us now return to Pak Usman and give him the chance to finish his presentation. Is that all right with you, Pak Usman?
Hi, Patin. Thank you so much. That's all right. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for being disconnected. It was in the middle of pencoblosan. I had to go to my mother-in-law house, and there was no proper signal there. So, okay.
That's great. But thank you very much. Just feel free to start again wherever you want at any point.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, I was asking some colleagues there, Ari and also Ari, and they said it was on the first slide on justice for past abuses. So I think my main argument for this is that Prabowo and Jokowi are two sides of the same coin when it comes to human rights. I don't see any any possibility for significant or positive change in the next 5 years under Prabowo's rule. I believe that Jokowi's failure in addressing past human rights abuses will be continued by Prabowo's failure, especially because Prabowo had more conservative ministers, not only individual from military backgrounds and linked to human rights abuses, such as Shafri Shamsuddin, but also some other ministers whom I consider to be conservative when it comes to human rights. That include Senior Minister Yusril Iza Mahendra, who at his first day made an unimpressive remark by saying that there were none of those in the last couple of decades, which means under Indonesian modern Indonesia, that there has never been any human rights violation taking place. Human rights violations that are considered to be gross human rights violation. And he, as just like when he was appointed as Gus Dur's minister at the time, he always blamed colonial authorities for committing human rights violation rather than showing how government have to be accountable for what has happened in 1998. And I think the denial of Yusril is very important sign for me to see how Prabowo's rule will look like. denying the tragedy in 1998 as a gross human right violation means that he or the government denied the series of shooting against students across Indonesia in 1998, the series of political kidnapping and pro-democracy activists' disappearance across Indonesia, and denying a series of riots, systematic riots, and racial violence and rapes against Chinese Indonesian across Indonesia in Jakarta, Solo, Medan, and other cities. So, in short, if Jokowi has fallen for short of fulfilling his pledge to uphold human rights, Prabowo will not do anything on human rights. I think Gus Nadir has just mentioned about statement by Minister Natalius Pigai on the 20 trillion rupiah for human rights. I was thinking that the 20 trillion rupiah could probably be used for, expanding the establishment of human rights court across Indonesia. According to the law, Indonesian government is obliged to establish human rights court in at least 5 district courts, such as in Jakarta, Makassar, Surabaya, and Medan, and so on. And apparently, his idea was just to have a big university, just to show that he's having a very smart projects, without looking at the fiscal scope, which is so limited, without looking at the reality where universities in Indonesia, especially the lower universities, are facing difficulties in recruiting students. So I don't see any human rights agenda being properly prepared, being properly formulated by either Minister of Human Rights, Minister of Coordinating Minister of Law and Human Rights, such as Yusril, or other ministers. So this shows, I think, that we won't see any significant change in the next 5 years to come. And not to mention gross human rights violation that continue to take place in Papua, which I will be talking in the 4 topics. Let me move to the second topic, which is about the most important topics today on human rights, which is the shrinking civic space. One of 3 major indicators of a country to be called democracy is, to have civic space for public protests, apart from having political opposition in the parliament for checks and balances, or an election with integrity. I think civic space is very key. Civic space for criticisms, for public protests is key to democracy. However, throughout the year of 2024 and throughout the last 10 years, Amnesty continued to report numerous instances of excessive use of force against peaceful protesters. Even in the months leading to the inaugurations of Prabowo, activists critical to government policies are subjected to brutal policing, subjected to intimidation by non-state actors. In September, a couple of months ago, peaceful protests on global climate strike held in central Jakarta was disrupted by plainclothes thugs. And before that incident, during the protest in August, the nationwide protests against the bill on regional election, which aimed to facilitate the Jokowi's youngest sons to serve in the regional office, resulted in more than 150 students were arbitrarily arrested, including 27 adults and 78 children. At least 11 journalists are also being, targeted with violence, death threats, and so on by law enforcement. The Justice Movement for Water, the People's Water Forum, was violently disrupted at the time. Even during the day of Prabowo's inauguration, a number of students and youngsters protesting in the MRT, wearing their clothes with some signs of protest, were being violently attacked, violently dispersed by authorities. In 2023, Amnesty raised concerns regarding the lack of free and prior informed consent by the government in undertaking development projects, including investment projects in Rempang, in Kepulauan Riau, or in Morowali, Sulawesi, in Halmahera in Maluku, as well as food estates in Merauke, South Papua. It is clear that the government and the authorities ignore the importance of free, prior, and informed consent. They ignore the importance of having a persuasive approach in convincing indigenous peoples, for example, to allow the government to undertake projects and investment by grabbing the land. Of course, we have, cyberspace. We have cyberspace where, many of us believe that cyberspace provides a vibrant new means for democracy activism. However, I have found, Amnesty International has found that social media or cyberspace has been co-opted, not only by oligarchic owners of social media, but also by both farms disseminating misinformation, disinformation, bipolarization, and infantilizations of discourse and debate, and also by widespread use of buzzers paid by oligarch, as well as repressive legislation, and even by spyware. The 2024 report of Amnesty highlighted the purchase of Pegasus spyware by Indonesia, which I believe to be likely be used by authorities under Prabowo's rule in the next 5 years to undermine pro-democracy actors, to undermine civic space. My colleague Ari Hermawan has done an extensive research on this. I think he will enlighten us with more details on the cyberspace, on how cyberspace, to what extent cyberspace has provided a democratic space to express criticisms and public protests. Let me move to the third issue, which is the human rights in Papua. I think the human rights situation in Papua nowadays continues to be extremely concerning. Not only that, extrajudicial killings linked to the ongoing armed conflict between security forces and the West Papuan rebels have been reported, but also any simple and peaceful expression can lead to a prison sentence due to sensitive terms such as referendum or merdeka or any calls for independence. At the same time, a growing number of cases of land grabbing, for example, have been reported to take place in several areas, including in Intan Jaya, and one of the most controversial projects has been in Merauke, the National Strategic Project for MIRE. This involves not only Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Agriculture, or Ministry of Investment, but also the overpresence of the military. And equally important is the involvement of private companies, namely John Lin Group, which has problematic records when it comes to deforestation or palm oil and so on. I think the overpresence of the armed military personnel in Papua that have been assigned to facilitate, to assist, to safeguard company activities have led to what Papuan calls a sense of insecurity, a sense of fear among indigenous people. Not to mention the armed conflict that has affected or that has displaced thousands of indigenous Papuans to refuge. They have to to leave their homes. They have to flee to the forest without proper access to water, to health, and so on. And in the last couple of years, UN treaty bodies, UN special procedures such as, UN reporter on IDPs, internally displaced persons, UN reporter on extrajudicial killing, and other reporters have highlighted the worsening state of human rights in Indonesia. Don't forget that in 2023, last year, one of the most strategic mechanism in the UN, which is the Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide, has started to include Indonesia in the list of countries where UN warned them that a slow process of genocide might take place in countries like Indonesia, especially in Papua. And also, it is important to see how Prabowo's gesture, Prabowo's policy continue to copy and paste what has been done by Jokowi. Prabowo, even before he was being inaugurated, he was coming to Papua. He visited Papua. He went there, with leader of John Lin groups and see the projects in Merauke, which shows that he is in full support of that land grabbing investment projects. And to me, this is going to be a disaster in the years to come, especially because of some factors, not only indigenous rights to land, not only in terms of human rights violation, not only in terms of, for example, corruption being taking place behind the scene, but also in terms of climate. I think the world is now looking at Indonesia, Congo, and Amazon as countries where the world or the earth has only 3 forests left. If we want to save the earth, if we want to save climate justice, I think we have to prevent any deforestation to take place in these 3 biggest forests in the world, Congo, Amazon, and Papua. And to Papua, I think coupled with ongoing exploration plans.
5 minutes, Usman.
Thank you, Bob. Land grabbing for food estate, coupled with Indonesia's mining plans in Intan Jaya in Central Highland, will lead to a series of human rights violations in the next 5 years. Let me move to the last point of my talk, which is about the religious minority. I don't see any plan or any human rights platform by Prabowo's cabinet to improve the human rights of religious minorities, not to mention gender minorities or sexual minorities. We have seen a number of local regional heads have made a reckless statement against LGBTQI. On religious minorities, Indonesian government have to revoke any discriminatory policies towards religious minorities when it comes to the license for houses of worship, when it comes to exercising of freedom of religion for Ahmadiyya, for Shia, and so on. And I don't see any plan for example, revisions of such laws, such discriminatory laws in Indonesia. The Minister of Religious Affairs is a good person, is a very moderate person, is a very open-minded person, but I don't think having a good person is enough to see the improvement of human rights of minorities in the years to come. I'll stop there, Pak Tim. So again, I have no confidence that in the next 5 years, human rights will be improving. By contrast, I would argue that the human rights situation is just getting worse. The democratic decline will be worsened under Prabowo's rule, especially because he is the one who aspire to return to Indonesia's original constitution. That would means stripping the right to direct presidential election, stripping the so many articles of human rights, recentralizing government, recentralizing Jakarta over Papua, over other regions, unlimited terms of presidency and weaker rule of law. And as someone with ultra-nationalist impulse, with divisive rhetorics, Prabowo would make minorities nervous, particularly ethnic Chinese, Indonesian, religious minorities, and Papuans. And on economic policy, given that he continued Jokowi's new developmentalist policy by deregulations of law on investment, on land grabbing, on forest clearing and extractive industries, I don't think human rights of labor, human rights of indigenous peoples, or environmental rights will be protected under Prabowo's rule. And lastly, the security-oriented policies by Prabowo's, the military way slogans will bring us into the reign of Prabowo not only in a militarized way, but I believe in a fascist way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pak Usman, for that very detailed account, and also for your patience in dealing with internet problems. Let's hope it was purely an accident. Thank you also, Pak Nadira, for jumping in and resolving that gap. I think we're back on track now, and we'll go straight to our next speaker. And just a reminder to participants that there will be a chance for Q&A once the presenters have finished. So Professor Susi Dwi Harijanti, who is Professor of Constitutional Law at Universitas Padjadjaran, and of course is a graduate of the University of Melbourne Law School, where she got her PhD. She is a qualified member of the Melbourne Mafia. Over to you, Ibu Susi, to talk about lawmaking under Prabowo.
Thank you. Good afternoon, team. Good afternoon from Bandung. And thank you for having me in this very important seminar that organized by SILIS. My presentation, as you mentioned before, that with the title of Lawmaking under Prabowo Administration, more or less democratic. I started my introduction, that is the critique of legislative process and subject matters of legislation. And we all know that the undemocratic lawmaking has become a deep concern during the last 5 years. And this reflects from the introduction of a number of laws, such as law on anti-corruption of 2019, and then followed by law on job creation in 2020, law on capital city of 2022, law on health on 2023, as well as law on constitutional court of 2020. And actually, up until now, before Jokowi has finished his term of office, the DPR, both with the president, try to offer or try to propose the 4th Amendment of the Constitutional Court, which is received huge critics, not only from the academic, but also from the former of the Constitutional Court justice. And what is a huge critic over such a law? The first one is that there is no meaningful participation. What the lawmaker did during the drafting process as well as the debate process in the parliament, merely a very formal participation, not a meaningful participation that involving a wide range of public, including those who will receive a important effect after the introduction or the promulgation of the law. And another difficulty, another critic is the difficulty in assessing the bills and academic draft. For example, when the president proposed a bill on capital city, we can read from the academic draft, but when the academic value or assess the academic draft, I think that the quality of the academic draft has not yet met with the principle, the scientific principle of preparing the academic draft. And then also less meaningful open debates. And in the case of law on job creation, using unfamiliar omnibus method. And there are huge or many revisions after mutual assent between the DPR and the president was reached. So there are a number of important or fundamental critiques over the legislative process during the last 5 years. And there are a new law on Presidential Advisory Board, and the amendment gives the board an equal standing with other state institutions by making the status entirely independent of the executive branch. And the new law also removed a limit on 9 on the number of council members and instead allow it to be determined by sitting president in accordance with his need. Another new law that promulgated during what we call the lambda session is a new law on ministry, that is law number 6 of 2024. And the number of ministry will be determined according to the needs of the administration of the government by the president. So we see from the promulgation of these two new laws, we raise the issue about how to establish a limited government. So it seems that the two laws give a very huge discretion to the president, and this is a very dangerous to the constitutionalism principle as well as the principle of the rule of law in Indonesia. And now I move to the critique of lawmaking, that is law number 12 of 2011, with relation with law number 13 of 2020. The first critique is the unlimited use of omnibus method. It seems to me that omnibus method can be used in all fields of matters, of subject matters, either in health, then afterwards in job creation, and now also in financial matters. And the second critique is the weak norms of meaningful participation. And this is a result of the use of words dapat or may in some paragraphs that can fundamentally prevent fulfillment of procedural rights in the form of meaningful participation. That is the right to be heard, the right to be considered, and the right to have an explanation. All these procedural rights are now regulated by Article 96 of the new law, that is number 13 of 2022. And is lawmaking process more democratic under President Prabowo administration? I identify a number of factors that can be considered. The first one is the Astacita, or the 8 goals. The second is the DPR, a new commission. There is a new commission dealing with regulation reform. And then the figure of ministries, that is the coordinating minister for law, human rights, immigration, and correction, as well as minister of law. That is the fourth factor that can be considered, the strong desire to follow up on recommendation issued by some initiatives, such as the legal reform acceleration team, namely from the regulatory sector. And then the fifth factor, that is the consistency of planning and implementation in the field of lawmaking and regulatory reform. And the national legislative program, or we are famously known as Program Legislasi Nasional, or Prolegnas. And now we move to each factor. The first one is the Astacita, or the 8 goals. If we see, the first goal is to reinforce the ideology of Pancasila, democracy, and human rights. And then we mention about the 7 goals, that is strengthen political, legal, and bureaucratic reforms, as well as enhance the prevention and eradication of corruption and drugs. But we will see whether the Asta Cita then elaborated in another policy that issued by the Prabowo government. And then the second factor, that is the DPR. Now, the DPR has two new commissions, and Commission 3 that previously dealing with law affairs, now it only focused on the law enforcement. And the chair of this commission is Habibur Rahman, that's come from the Gerindra, the president's party. And this is the commission working partners. And then we move to the, the DPR. This is the new commission, the new commission 13 that dealing with the regulatory reform and human rights. Even though that it is chaired by Willy Aditya, come from the National Democrat Party. However, there is a deputy chair that again belong or come to the Gerindra party. So it seems to me that every commission, or in particular legal commission, is filled by Gerindra members. And also another committee that should be taken into account in the field of legal affairs, that is the legislative committee. And this legislative committee plays a vital role in preparing prolegnas and lawmaking process. And again, who is the chair of this committee? The chair of this committee, again filled by Dr. Bob Hassan. He's also a member of Gerindra party. So from these three DPR, vital commission and vital committee, I think that each of the commission not only chaired by Gerindra, but also become a vice chair. And now I move to the next factor. That's the ministry, what I call the figure of ministry. As Pak Usman mentioned before, that there is a Yusril Iza Mahendra, the conservative minister, that has a power to become a coordinating minister for legal, human rights, immigration, and correction affairs. Then his deputy minister is Otto Hasibuan. He's a lawyer. And then Supratman Andi Aktas become a minister of law, who is previously chair of the DPR Legislative Committee, and he also a member of Gerindra party. And then Prabowo appointed Edward Omar Sarif Hiraj, or Edi Hiraj, to become Deputy Minister of Law, who is previously Deputy Minister for Law and Human Rights under Jokowi administration. And we can see from all of these figures of minister, I'm not quite sure if each of the minister will improve the lawmaking process during the next 5 years, considering all the background of each of the minister. And then the next factor that important to mention is the recommendation by the Legal Reform Acceleration Team. This team is established in 2023 by Coordinating Minister of Politics, Law and Security, and its members mostly academics and civil society. There are four sectors in this team, that law enforcement, natural resources, anti-corruption, and regulation. I myself joined with this team and give a focus on a regulation reform. There are 4 aspects of recommendation issued or produced by this team dealing with regulation reform. The first one is the institutional aspect. That is, refer to a single authoritative regulatory agency, which already mandated by law number 15 of 2019. The second aspect is law and regulatory governance that refer to the planning, implementation, evaluation of law and regulatory making, including issues on the use of omnibus method, limitation of the use of peraturan pemerintah pengganti undang-undang. The third scope dealing with participation, either direct and indirect public participation, and the last aspect dealing with publication, easy and integrated access to legal documents dealing with law and regulation. And in short, this team proposed the need to revise law number 12 of 2011 on lawmaking and its implementing regulation, particularly presidential regulation number 87 of 2014. And now I move to the Rancangan Awal RPJMN, or the initial draft of the National Medium-Term Development Plan, and it is still the indicative or still the draft, because it's still wait for presidential decree on the officially of a coming force of the RPJMN. From 17 years, there is a reform of legal reform as one of the 17 program of priority decided by the president. But how about the quick win program? I think there is an absence of law reform is in a quick win program. There's only first the providing free lunches and meal, then organizing free medical checkup, provide and increase the productivity of agricultural land, then building integrated high quality schools in each district. And then another, the fifth quick wins is continue and add social security programs to overcome absolute poverty. Then six, increase the salary of ASN or civil servant, especially teacher, lecturers, health staff, and extension workers, including TNI Polri and state officer. So it is very surprise for me that the Prabowo government also put the increase of the state officer salary as his quick wins program. The seventh is
5 minutes.
Okay, continuing the development of village and sub-district infrastructure, etc. And 8, establish the state revenue agency and increase the ratio of state revenue to gross domestic product. And after we see the draft, the initial draft of RPJM, and then we can scrutinize the work plan of government 2025. In 8 work plan of government, there is bill on lawmaking. So this is again show the inconsistency between plan and work plan of the government. Again, these regulatory changes are needed to support effort to transform regulatory governance. Several things that need to be regulated according to work plan of government. Strengthen the synergy of regulatory governance at the central and regional levels, strengthening monitoring and evaluation of regulatory through self-assessment by ministry or agency, and strengthening governance of ministerial regulation, institutional regulation, and the like. And lastly, comprehensive regulation regarding the omnibus method. And again, the prolectness, the absence of bill on lawmaking, both proposed by Commission 3 and Commission 13. There is no bill on lawmaking. And as a closing statement, I will say that it seems that the democratic lawmaking process would be hard to implement due to some factor, the possible factor. The first one is the figure of the DPR members and the minister that mostly from KI Kim Plus. coalition Indonesia Maju or Indonesian Maju, and then the absence of law reform agenda as a priority. There is what should be done nationally, the need to enhance intense and continuing various forms of collaboration between academic, university student, and civil society, and internationally broaden networks with international actors. Thank you, Tim, for allowing me to present my thought regarding lawmaking process under Prabowo administration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Susi, for that very detailed and thorough presentation. There's a lot of information there for people to think about. We're on time, going well. So we'll push on to our next speaker. Just a reminder that we will have time for discussion when our speakers have finished. Our next presenter is Pak Ari Hermawan, formerly the Jakarta Post, who we are very lucky to have as our editor at Indonesia at Melbourne. And that link is there in your chat. So please, everyone, after this meeting, rush off and read all the wonderful articles and encourage you to submit too. We look forward to submissions from as many people as we can. So, Pak Ari will be talking about online civic space under Prabowo. Silakan.
Thank you, Pak Tim. Thank you, everyone, for joining this online seminar. So I'll be talking about the online civic space under Prabowo. I'm going to approach this issue from a more of a political economy perspective. So I see the way that state power or digital repression, state power is exercised in cyberspace as being largely informed by conflicts among different social interests in Indonesian society, particularly among the elite. So the argument that I try to propose here is that whether or not online civic space will shrink further under Prabowo pretty much depends on the intensity of conflicts within the oligarchy, and also how the subaltern or non-oligarchic forces, in this case, society groups, NGOs, and also the rebel groups as well as the Islamists respond to the conflict. So that's pretty much the theoretical frameworks of this presentation. So if you can see here, so I think I'm going to give like an overview of the state of cyberspace in Indonesia, and I think Pak Usman has given us like at least like a short overview of that. So in general, Indonesian cyberspace is only partly free according to Freedom House. So that's because the legal architecture of Indonesian cyberspace is largely considered to be illiberal. Freedom House classified Indonesia again is partly free, and this is because Indonesian citizens still facing a lot of like restrictions on the web, whether through the use of cyber laws and also the deployment of cyber troopers, as well as I think in the last 5 years there will be the use of cutting edge spywares to intimidate political dissent. So the trend is not very encouraging, and I think like under Jokowi. So if you can see here, I think since 2017, Singapore is considered to have more online freedom than Indonesia. That's, again, pretty concerning. So again, this is just an overview. So we still have several pieces of legislation that regulate the limits of free speech in Indonesia, and they're all considered to be problematic. So the provisions of this pieces of legislation could easily be used to prosecute citizens or netizens in Indonesian parlance just for expressing their opinion online. We still have the IT law, which was recently revised, but still contains some draconian provisions. If you follow some of the reports issued by SafeNet by our colleague Damar, and I think is it next year or is it next year? I forgot. Maybe Pak Tim can correct me on that. I think next year KUHP will take effect, and also the new criminal code will also contain several provisions on online defamation, which is actually like moving the content from ITE law to the KUHP. So the new KUHP will pretty much ban online defamation, including the insults against the president. These provisions again could be abused by the oligarchic elite to protect their interests. And I think the recent online defamation case against Haris and Fathia, this is on our like a really prominent human rights activist, is a reminder of how our like flaw legal framework and also the legal state apparatuses could actually be used as instruments and co-opted by the elite to silence again political or against government critiques. So we still have other problematic legislations as well, including the 2008 pornography law. We also have the 1999 telecommunication law. Several legislations that pretty much like govern our online life, I would say. So other than I would say the institutional censorship or control tactic or strategy sort of instrument, we still also have this technological instrument that the elite could use to surveil, to spy on citizens, and also to intimidate activists. So this is what digital scholars call the increasing digital coercive capabilities. This is considered as one of the factors that pretty much drive a digital authoritarianism, not only in Indonesia, but also in the region. So again, basically, again, this is actually part of my PhD research. So Indonesian state basically has increased its coercive capabilities online since 2000, at least 2016. In 2016, we remember it was actually one of the most tense periods in post-democracy Indonesia, when at the time during the Jakarta gubernatorial election, like a Christian of Chinese descent, this is actually the first Christian governor of Jakarta, is competing against I would say like in a way like indigenous or pribumi. I think that's what the word used by Anies. And that was it was actually the period where cyberspace is seen as a threat to the state. And at that point, there was incentive for the Jokowi government to increase its capacity. So there will be, since then, the Jokowi government has engaged in basically a spending spree in the global spyware industry. So buying spywares like Pegasus, Predators, and then Circle. There's a number of like spywares that have been purchased by the state agencies tasked with managing security in cyberspace, including the police, the State Intelligence Agency, BSSN, as well as the military. And I think in 2024, again, Usman has mentioned this before, that Amnesty found that there are like an extensive networks of basically companies that imported spywares from Israel, Malaysia, Greece, and several European countries. Again, the point here I'm trying to make is that in addition to the legal framework, that the illiberal legal framework or the legal instruments that can be used to silence critiques, the government also has this capacity, or in my opinion, the oligarchic elite controlling state power has this, capabilities to surveil or basically to intimidate activists online. So this is actually my argument, is that the level of digital repression in Indonesia often was reflected or actually was driven by the intensity of conflicts between oligarchs. So as we can see here, within 2014 and 2019, we have this era called the Cebong Kampret era. It was actually divided when people were concerned about hate speech and Indonesia becoming even more polarized. And based on my research, turns out that a lot of these has to do with the conflicts between elite, particularly between the Jokowi, Luhut, Megawati, and then we have also Surya Paloh alliance against Prabowo, and then Susilo Bambang SBY, and also Yusuf Kala at the time. Even though Yusuf Kala was then part of the government, Yusuf Kala was actually Jokowi's VP. There was a conflict, like a brewing conflict between Kala and basically Luhut and also Jokowi over at the time actually about the energy policies, actually about the question of whether the government needs to buy the stake in Freeport, and who's going to buy for that. I think remember that, like, if you remember the Papa Minta Saham scandal involving Setia Novanto, there was an involvement. It actually reflects conflict between Luhut and JK over the government energy policy, and that pretty much after that, JK nominated Anies for president, for governor in Jakarta, and the rest is history. And again, if you see the graph here, I think this is the data from on the right top left here. This is actually data from SafeNet. Is that in 2016 and 2017 there was like a spike in the number of online defamation cases, and that pretty much because of the intensity of conflict between oligarchs, and that pretty much reflected in civil society at the time. In 2019 and 2022, that was actually like a changing oligarchy configuration. Prabowo joined the Jokowi government, and then pretty much like I would say the dominant oligarchic alliance becoming more consolidated, and they managed to enact a number of problematic law. I think according to Susi presentation, and this is like the omnibus law and also the revision to the KPK, and that's pretty much triggered public unrest or public response or public outrage at the time. And it was clear that the target was obviously the civil society forces, but they're based on my research about the nature of the narrative warfare at the time. A lot of the voices of the civil society were actually amplified by SBY, linked political buzzers, the Democrats, also PKS as well, and also people close to Anies and JK. That's pretty much that's not because the oligarchic rivals of Jokowi at the time disagree with the omnibus law, because in 2023 when Democrats join Jokowi, they don't have any issues whatsoever about the omnibus law. They're pretty much like implementing the law. So that's actually the argument. So this, the level of oligarchic conflict, especially ahead of election, when the stakes are pretty high, because again, this is about the question of contesting power, that become like a catalyst of whether or not the state will use its coercive power, whether it's actually the IT law or spywares. So this is again to maybe Maya will actually explain further, but this is how I analyze the social forces of social interest in cyberspace. So we have the oligarchy, and then oligarchy has this network of political buyers, and I will obviously divide. We can always divide political buyers as those linked to this subdominant oligarchic alliance. So between 2014 and 2016, these buzzers, the subdominant oligarchic powers, were affiliated with JK and SBY, for example. But now it's different. After 2024, the subdominant oligarchic alliance is actually PDIP and Anies. So this alliances actually shape or inform the tone of political conversations in cyberspace. Like, for example, when Anies and PDIP join forces, I don't think that PDIP will call Anies governor or Anies actually like a symbol of Khilafah or Caliphate or something, because it doesn't serve their interests. And of course, we have other social forces that not linked to the oligarchy. We have the NGOs, we have people like Usman, and then we have the Islamists as well. We have labor groups. Some of labor groups probably linked to the oligarchy, but most of them are not. We have the fandom community as well. And all these forces, they are the top influencers in cyberspace. And there could easily be victims of IT law and be victims of digital attacks. So that's in a way how the conflicts could actually reflect, and we can actually understand how that will determine whether or not we'll have a shrinking civic space or not. Okay, so I have two more slides. So basically, the questions of the fate of our online civic space under Prabowo, I think it depends. Again, I don't see it because Prabowo has, of course, authoritarian tendency, but I think whether or not we have like a shrinking or a narrower online civic space depends on the oligarchy configuration during Prabowo's presidency. Will Prabowo manage to consolidate his power among the oligarchic elite and prevent conflicts among them? If, like, for example, Prabowo managed to convince PDIP, for example, to join his government, then it will be probably a different era for us, because again, Jokowi government at the time was actually was characterized by conflicts among the elites. So if Prabowo basically managed to consolidate his power, then there will be little incentive for Prabowo to basically deploy digital control strategies, because again, the oligarchic elite will not use civil society forces to attack his government. And then probably Prabowo will mobilize social organizations like like certain elements within Muhammadiyah or NU to discredit activists, and then we'll consider them as anti or agen asing, or like foreign lackeys, and other terms that these pretty much might discredit their credibility. So, but if the intensity
5 minutes, Ari.
All right. So if PDIP wins the Jakarta election, and if PDIP wins the Central Java election, then PDIP will have more leverage, and then we can see how that the PDIP and its alliances like Megawati and Anies, for example, they will actually use their state power at their disposal to challenge the Prabowo government, and we can see, and we probably will see, like in this fine conflict, and with that, probably more persecutions, more digital repressions by the Prabowo government. So, so that's basically what I'm trying to say. It really depends. Even though that I believe that NGOs, have their agency, that they can actually challenge the oligarchy, but the oligarchy actually, at the time, the conflict, the competing interests within them could actually shape the political dynamic in cyberspace. So for the last slides, what can civil society forces do? I think this is actually what Maya will actually answer. I think the progressive forces can make alliances with Anies and PDIP. I think PDIP now is like basically trying to campaign Jokowi is anti-democracy and then trying to fight for democracy. And maybe we can have an alliance with PDIP, but that's the risk that PDIP will probably betray civil society again. So the other solution would be to create like a cohesive social movement, and that we won't rely too much on the oligarchic powers to challenge the government. So that's it. I think. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you so much, Ari. You've even got 2 spare minutes. Well done. Thank you. That was a really rich and complex presentation with a lot of information, but it leads perfectly into our next presentation by Maya. Fauzia Mayangsari is a researcher at Amnesty International, and she's going to, I think, take up the challenge that Ari left us at the end about what next, talking about civil society under Prabowo. Maya, silakan.
Okay, thank you, Patim, and thank you, Silis, for having me today, and thank you everyone for attending this online seminar. So today I will be speaking about the prospect of civil society in Indonesia under Prabowo. I have a reason why I have emergency warning as my background, as blue, also as the background of my presentations, because it has become a symbol of resistance from civil society in Indonesia since 2024, since the Peringatan Darurat demonstration. So there's a reason for that. And that will be also one of my arguments, that civil society remains one of the remaining important actors to defend democracy in Indonesia under Prabowo. So this is the outline of my presentations. First, I will start with the state of civil society now by doing a retrospect towards Jokowi's presidency over the 10 years so that we understand where are we now. And then I will move forward to Prabowo's presidency and challenges ahead. And I will end my presentation trying to remain hopeful because that's the source of optimism that we have right now. So under 10 years of Jokowi's presidency, pro-democracy civil society forces are structurally weaker than any time since 1998. Civil society faced significant democratic regression. The old reformasi coalition between pro-democracy civil society groups and the government, which once fostered democratic reform, has come to an end. Jokowi's administration also has shown little interest in civil society input and has increasingly resorted to repression. As mentioned by Mas Ari before, it also happened in the online sphere with ITE law and what Mas Usman said before as well on human rights abuses. Political influence of civil society groups also declined significantly over the course of his presidency, and concessions made by government towards civil society became rare. The period of Jokowi's presidency saw a notable increase in repression through various means, ranging from legal measures to physical intimidation and surveillance. Repression became more frequent, severe, and purposeful, shifting from targeting specific local actors to defending the national government. We all remember the harsh repression against protesters in 2019 Reformasi di Korupsi protest, which killed 5 demonstrators. Also in 2020 Tolak Omnibus Law, and even the recent one in 2024 Peringatan Darurat protest. What Jokowi has done was not only successful in suppressing dissent and critics, but it also created an atmosphere of fear and self-censorship within civil society. But besides the external factors, that is repression, civil society in Indonesia also underwent a structural shift. And over the last decade, and particularly during President Jokowi tenure, we have seen a notable decline in funding support for NGOs in Indonesia. One key reason for this decline is that Indonesia, having become a middle-income country, is no longer a priority for many overseas development assistance programs. Donors who have previously supported democratic governance and watchdog programs have shifted their focus to areas such as climate change and energy transition, as well as supporting government policies. But government action has also played a significant role in this weakening. Right now, major donors have increasingly coordinated their programs with the Indonesian government, and this coordination has led to a shift away from politically sensitive areas. Additionally, the government also implemented a rigorous screening process under the UU Ormas. National NGO grantees of foreign donors must present their planned activities to a monitoring team for foreign organization or tim pengawasan organisasi asing, which includes representatives from government ministries and intelligence agencies. This process has led to significant government control over NGO activities, and in some cases, the government has outright vetoed funding for organizations deemed too critical of the administration. One example is what happened in Perludem in 2023. A second shift within Indonesian civil society was increased internal divisions, especially during Jokowi's first term. This shift was influenced by the broader national political polarization between Islamists and pluralists that followed the 212 protests. Some civil society groups, particularly those linked with the traditionalist Islamic organization, religious minorities, were co-opted into government's political agenda. These groups, which on focus on socio-religious pluralism and combating Islamic radicalism, began viewing Islamism as a more pressing issue than government corruption and repression. Groups working on policy reform and gender equality, areas closely related to the anti-Islamist agenda, also moved closer to the government. Many of these groups became recipients of government funding and found opportunities to engage with government on policy initiatives. This proximity to the government often dampened their willingness to engage in anti-government activism. But while these divisions might seem like a reflection of Indonesia's complex civil society, they also echo patterns from the New Order era. Under the previous authoritarian regime, some NGOs engaged directly with the government on development programs, while others, often foreign-funded, adopted an independent watchdog role. So what's left now with civil society is a weaker condition that at any time since 1998, and there's a lack of public response and international support for NGOs. Indonesian civil society activism has reached a deadlock. Today's activists face a fragmented landscape without a clear adversary, and this ongoing challenge has sparked a period of deep reflection within civil society. And this graph from FIDEM confirmed my findings before, that we can see here on the red line. It is a civil society participation index. Since 2018, since 2014, it fluctuates, but after 2020, it decreases significantly. And similarly with the CSO repression, the blue line, it increased significantly since 2019, I think, after reformasi di korupsi protest. So now let's take a look at what we have within a month of Prabowo's presidency as a basis to predict what's coming in the next 5 years. In his presidential speech, Prabowo said that Indonesia democracy must be a polite democracy, demokrasi yang santun. What does that mean? No idea. Democracy where differences of opinions must be hostility, a democracy where correction must be without insults. This should be an alert for us, for civil society as well, because freedom of expression is a basis of democracy. So what does it mean really? Like we could not have differences of opinion without hostility. Previously, he also said that democracy is tiring, messy, and costly. I would say that Prabowo's misgivings about representative government has not changed that much. Also, his favor of centralized and militaristic approach also remains the same. He wants everything under his control, as reflected in his reluctance to delegate authority and focus on consolidating power within his political alliance. There was also the military boot camp for his incoming ministers early in his presidency. Rather than, I don't know, convincing the public how he and his team will implement key campaign programs, he chose to have a military boot camps instead. So it shows how his militaristic tendency is still there. His oversized cabinet also worth noting. I think Pak Nadir has explained this very comprehensively before, but he made a cabinet with minimal opposition. This posed challenges for check and balances process in the next 5 years, as well as efficiency of policymaking process. Also worth noting, something that may relates directly with civil society is the composition of former activists in the cabinet. There were at least 6 former activists who have become part of this government, as seen, many are the vice minister, as seen in the summary from Tempo here. In a glance, one might hope that their positions might bring a new perspective within government about the advancement of reformist agendas. But we need to think more critically about this. During Jokowi's presidency, the existence of former activists in the government has relatively lacked significance for civil society. It happened during his 10 years of presidency. They generally lacked power within government and had few significant policy wins. In the view of at least some NGO leaders, by Jokowi's second term, such people had become useless for promotion of a broad pro-democracy agendas. And there's no guarantees at this time the situation will change. We can discuss on this, but I'm more on the skeptical side of this position. Now, given all those considerations, what is going to happen with civil society in the next 5 years? I'll start with challenges ahead. This is a prediction, so we can discuss more on this later. So it might or might not happen, but the first challenge is co-optation. The patronage politics have significantly undermined the political life in Indonesia. Most elected officials have few reasons to cooperate with civil society actors seeking policy outcomes. Instead, they build alliances with wealthy actors, as explained by Mas Ari before about the oligarchic interests, who often have anti-democratic agendas. And for election, they seek access to social networks to which they can direct patronage in return for votes. Co-optation of members of civil society is also plausible. For example, Tempo dubbed the incorporation of former activists that I explained in previous slides in Prabowo's cabinet as an attempt to whitewashing the human rights violation that marred Prabowo's image. Mas Usman also has explained about this as well. And the second challenge is more controlled and surveillance on donor funds. This one, I think, poses one of the biggest challenges we have ahead. Given that NGOs are also not receiving the international support they once had in the past 10 years, the worrying view that Indonesia was moving in the direction of countries such as India and Russia, where governments exercise that control over foreign funding for NGOs also deepen. This could eventually stifle Indonesia anti-government civil society activism. And lastly, a more repressive environment for civil society. Prabowo does not need to do much to achieve this condition, as it has already been done by Jokowi. But he might do even more worse. Within first month of his presidency, we have already seen critics were suppressed, such as what happened with the freezing of student councils in FISIP Universitas Erlangga in Surabaya, after criticizing the inauguration of Prabowo and Gibran in a satirical congratulatory flower board. The president of BEM FISIP UNER also even received threat and intimidation after the event. There was only one example. So therefore, we have to be aware and vigilant of more repressive moves in the next 5 years. But I want to end my presentation here in a more hopeful tones. I feel like I have to give source of optimism given the bleak outlook on various aspects of our democracy. And I don't think this is an answer to a challenge by Mas Ari, though, but we can discuss more after this. First, despite the weak condition resulted from Jokowi's presidency, oppositional culture continues within civil society and universities. We witnessed the return of mass protests during Jokowi era in a scale that's similar to those that took place in the late New Order period. Authoritarianism always has these two sides. It might be repressive, but at the same time, that repressiveness often reinvigorated the resistance and oppositional spirit within social force. So when I did my thesis in 2021 about student movement, the students mentioned about this condition. The 2019 repressiveness has fueled their anger more in 2020. So like I said before, it always has two sides. So yeah, it could be repressive and the civic space are shrinking very much, but at the same time, it might invigorate their oppositional spirit. The oppositional culture also infused a stronger solidarity within civil society and the continuing interconnectivity of civil society network. Many civil society actors that I talked to view the administration led by Prabowo with great concern, viewing him as an historic enemy of their movement and of human rights in general, and with a feeling that resistance will be a duty. This solidarity must be nurtured to create a resiliency within social movements and civil society in general, which brings me to the homework of civil society in the next 5 years. Actually, there are many homeworks that Indonesian civil society has, but I think these two are the most pressing ones. First, they must overcome the internal polarization that still exists internally. The fragmentation has been a long-standing complexity nature of Indonesia's civil society, where usually they return to business as usual, prioritizing their own agendas over sustaining a massive resistance against autocratic elites. So how to do it? I think one way to do it is by focusing on the greater structural problems that is tailored to the context and targeted primarily at its most effective dimensions, for instance, democratic institutions. And related to the first point, I believe Indonesia civil society, such as NGOs, must establish a larger social base, particularly with grassroots community. Building the bridge between social forces is very important because by having a larger social base, we can establish a resilient civil society that is not just come in defense when democratic institutions are under attack, but it is an everyday resilience.
Maya, I think we've lost you there. You've frozen. Okay, I think Maya has frozen there, so we might just take that as the end of the presentation. And that brings us, thank you very much, Maya, for a great and interesting presentation. There's lots to talk about there. In fact, there's lots to talk about from all of our speakers today. We have some time now for discussion, and we have a number of questions in the Q&A, quite a few, in fact, so I might start with those. The first question I'll choose is from Zarkasi Bilal Arafat, and he points out that Indonesia has been shaken by the tragic case of Gama, a high school student fatally shot by police. He says the police initial narrative appeared a unilaterally crafted, compelling civil society to demand transparency and justice. He says it highlights systemic imbalance of power, where the public feels voiceless and forced to endure injustice with resignation. Given this context, the question is, how does, and this is a question for all our panelists who may want to answer, how does President Prabowo's administration plan to address and reform entrenched issues within law enforcement institutions to ensure accountability and restore public trust? Considering his own controversial human rights record during the New Order period, can he credibly position himself as a leader committed to safeguarding human rights and preventing abuses under his administration? There's the question. Anybody that would like to answer it? So maybe that's one for you, Pak Usman.
Pak Tim, thank you so much. I am at the ballot box location, so could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was the question related to the case of Gama, the student shot by police, and the question is, how does Prabowo's administration plan to address and reform entrenched issues within law enforcement institutions to restore public trust? Given his own controversial human rights record in the New Order period, can President Prabowo credibly position himself as a leader committed to safeguarding human rights and preventing abuses?
I don't think that Prabowo will improve the human rights situation in Indonesia by, for example, reforming some of discriminatory laws, by establishing human rights court for resolutions of past abuses, or even by, let's say, opening up for more revision to the penal code, which has adopted some of the problematic articles, including on defamation, blasphemy, as well as on insulting president. And equally important is, I don't think that Prabowo will, for example, open up for amendment to the omnibus law that provides how do you call it, flexibility for investment in order to get land clearing, land grabbing, ignoring social ethics, environmental ethics, including free and prior informed consent. So what has been shown so far is a kind of populist policy on all fronts, including on economic sectors such as the free lunch or makan siang gratis. So again, if I get it right, the question, I don't see any possible change in a positive way when it comes to legal reform for better protections of human rights.
Thanks so much, Pak Usman. And you're down at the ballot box now. Is it busy there?
Yes, there. You want to see it?
Yes, give us a look.
Okay, all right. Let me show the button. So where is the video button? Oh, I'm sorry. The video button. So did you see it now?
Oh, yes, we can see that. Thank you.
Yeah, this is the ballot box in Duren Sawit, in my mother-in-law's house. So people are coming, people are excited to vote for the governor of Jakarta. So yeah, I think this is this shows a very good participation of the people, but of course, as has been mentioned by many speakers, the elites have been mostly disappointed in many areas on human rights perspective, of course.
Thank you, Pak Usman. Thank you for being our reporter on the spot.
Of course.
Okay. Thank you. That's
My
great.
pleasure.
Thank you. We'll go to the next question now, which is from an anonymous person. And this one's for you, Ari. Are you ready? Regarding the extensive sale and deployment of digital spyware in Indonesia, how do you see the potential harm and deployment of them during the Prabowo era? And how can the Indonesian citizen be prepared to face negative effects from that?
All right, yeah, that's an interesting questions. Actually, after like a few weeks after Prabowo was elected, he actually gave like a speech during an event organized by Partai Amanat Nasional, the National Mandate Party, and then Prabowo has been complaining about the use of spywares against the opposition groups. I think in 2019, Prabowo complained, "Oh, why is it that the BIN or the spy agency is basically surveilling or snooping on people like Rahmawati or Amin Rais?" And because at the time, it is likely that they were actually victims of surveillance. And at the time, again, it was in the context of election. If you have the spywares, then you have the upper hand in the competition, in the electoral competition. So Prabowo actually mentioned that again, like a few months ago, like let's stop doing that. Let's stop spying on each other. So the problem is that Prabowo is actually talking about, conflicts between elites and about really like so sort of like, oh, that's like a rule of the game. But then again, does that mean that Prabowo will not use it on citizen or the Prabowo government? I'm not saying Prabowo, the president himself. The fact is that I'm not really sure. But all we know, if you read reports by Amnesty, reports by Forbidden Stories, and other organizations that focus on digital rights, we can see that there has been an increase in the purchase of digital surveillance tools by Indonesian state agencies. And it is only natural if you think that they're probably going to use it for, they want to say, to fight terrorism, for the sake of protecting national interests, but then they can also abuse that because, again, there is no guarantee, there's no legal, basically, framework that actually protect the citizens from basically the encroachments of the state into our privacies. And that's obviously concerns. So, again, yes, the government can actually do it. Whether they will do it, I don't know. Because again, it's really hard to basically prove whether or not the government is actually spying on you. So the question of whether what can we do? Well, it's really hard to say because it's about technology. We have AI now. I think the latest surveillance technology produced by NSO. It's called Pegasus is one of the best spyware. Pegasus is also called the zero-click tool or zero-click spyware. Zero-click means that you do not need to click an email or click on a link sent to you to your WhatsApp to get infected by malwares. So basically, the government now has the technological capacity basically to infect your devices, and there's little we can do about it, other than probably ensuring that you have everything protected. But again, overall, I think the most vulnerable people will be the activists and then journalists, as well academics, basically researching very sensitive issues. But if you're like regular citizens who are not probably involved and you don't actually regularly say something that is considered as a threat to the elite interest, you'll probably be okay. But that doesn't mean that it will happen to you. And in a way, it can't. There's little we can do at this point, I have to say. I think other than following what Maya has said about creating like a large social base for civil society, I think what we can do, I think this is actually like an agreement among scholars, is that we need to raise the political cost of repression. So if we can raise the political cost of repression in cyberspace, that means that the government will be disincentivized to engage in digital repression. But that, again, requires a lot of work, basically, to create like a really strong civil society that countervail, they could actually countervail the power of the state. I think that's my answer, Fatim. Sorry, it's really not really satisfying.
Oh, that's great, Ari. Thank you so much. Next question is for Professor Susi, which comes from Rifai Yusuf, and he says that under Jokowi, the government approach used to be based on impulsive policy rather than making a blueprint or robust long-term strategy of policy and legal framework. And then he points to the fact the new law and state ministries, which is controversial. He sees that also as part of an impulsive policy produced without blueprint or proper planning and strategy, because there's no strong study to amend the law before it's amended. And the question is, do you think this kind of impulsive policy making will continue under the Prabowo administration? What sectors are likely to be treated with this kind of policy? Over to you, Susi.
Okay. Thank you. I think, as I mentioned before, then I'm not quite optimistic that the Prabowo administration will improve the quality of lawmaking, either both in process as well as the content or subject matters. Okay, so I think why this can happen under the Prabowo administration, because again that Prabowo not give a priority over the improvement of the quality of legislation in Indonesia as well as regulation, and you can see from the priority that given or the quick win that proposed by Prabowo administration. So I think that maybe in a number of fields that can be inclusive, that is the field that it will strengthen what the Prabowo program. So this is my answer. This is the part of my answer, Tim. Perhaps I can give a more elaboration if there is still time to this. But I want to add answer to Usman about how whether the President Prabowo will take action in regard to the policing of the UGM student. Shot the UGM student. I think that I don't know whether we can have a high hope to the new Minister of Higher Education, Professor Satrio, because when the Vice Chancellor or the Rector of UNER, or the Dean of the Faculty of the Political and Science Faculty freeze the student organization, then the Minister, Professor Satrio, Minister of Higher Education, asked Rector to restore the status of the student organization. So I think that perhaps we can still put our hope to the important role of the Minister of Higher Education to increase academic freedom as well as freedom of expression in a university. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Susi. Our next question, I think, is for Maya. Or for Pak Usman. This is from Rafaela Wulandari, who says, thank you for the insightful presentations, touched with the information, and really agreed we need to do something to prevent democratic backsliding and protect our non-state actors. But as someone coming from a donor organization, I wonder if any resource person has any advice on how donor organizations can better support a democratic program. As I also see some fears among donors to support this type of program, noting geopolitical tensions and Indonesia's growing influence.
Thank you, Pak Tim. First, I want to...
Maybe just send them an invoice, Maya.
Yeah, maybe. First, I want to apologize. My laptop suddenly crashed in the middle of my presentation, but I was already at the end anyway.
It's fine.
That's the question, right? I think one way to do it is to
a lot of NGOs are doing it right now. They divert the donors through national NGOs who can divert it back to more grassroots communities. Unfortunately, it's sort of like a similar pattern that we see in New Order era, where subversion and surveillance is really strong from the government. But I think we can learn from that period as well, how to navigate the political challenges by the government. But as for probably from donor organizations know more about the TPOA and everything like that. But yeah, I think that's one way to do it. The simple answer is that. But I think probably Mas Usman has another answer as the leader of organization.
Yes, thank you so much, Maya. Usman, what do you have any thoughts on specifically how donor organizations can better support a democratic program in the current constraints?
Yeah, I think I share Maya's opinion on the rerouting donor support, not directly through a grassroots organization, but through certain organization based in a center or through a transnational network. One of the most important recommendation, which I believe to be crucial for pro-democracy activists, is democratic organizing. I think given the enormity of the challenges and risks that we face, it would be all too easy to slide into despair and defeat. And the odds are surely stacked against us, you know. And in this forum, I would like to propose a review and refresh of democratic grassroots organizing, as well as digital organizing that nurtures genuine solidarity and sustainable movement. Many times I've attended a consolidation forum of civil society organization in Indonesia or social movement actors in Indonesia. I have often mentioned about the importance of having, you know, a common, how do you call it, a common sense of crisis. I gave a very simple illustration, like, you know, the follow Soeharto. Many of us have focused on, you know, each part of the rooms of the house, right? Those environmental activists working mostly for our garden in the past, those researchers mostly focus on in our library, but many others are focusing on the front line, receiving complaints, you know, pengaduan, pelaporan, report from the people in the front desk, like LBH, you know, putting for legal action, being quite legal fetish, so to speak. And as a result, no one taking care of the whole house. So what we need to do is to sit down in a living room to get together and, you know, and discuss how the house of our democracy is started to burn. It started to be, you know, undermined or attacked by external anti-democratic forces. So again, democratic organizing is, as I believe, is so important, together with participatory and inclusive forms of organizing, including learning from the resilience of indigenous and religious tradition. And why organizing is important, I think, because pro-democracy work has a number of tools and approaches at its disposal. Three of the most options for change include advocacy, mobilizing, and organizing. I think mobilization can be leveraged into, you know, engaging people to raise and protest specific issues. However, it can lead to a focus on short-term results. It does not necessarily lead to a sustainable community movement or identity, and is vulnerable to co-optation and misuse by undemocratic forces, like during today's election. Money politics, you know, divisive rhetorics, polarization by oppositional forces are ubiquitous everywhere. So while mobilization is key option for change, we should not rely on mobilization alone.
And I think in the face of entrenched democratic backsliding and the erosion of democratic rights such as, civic space or freedom of speech or freedom of assembly, a focus on organizational work is necessary for raising both awareness and solidarity, for building networks, relationship within or together with other communities. So organizing is about, supporting and strengthening leadership, strengthening the movement, and also it's about listening. It's about doing the work to expand the base that has numbers. I agree with Maya, expanding the larger social base for NGOs. And this is also important for donors in order to have a bottom-up approach based on the actual reality of the social landscape or political landscape that are being faced by pro-democracy activists. So again, I would suggest that democratic organizing should be the priority for all of us, for civil society organizations, for donors, in order to prevent ourselves from, from being from feeling defeated or from feeling of despair in this worldwide of democracy.
Right, thank you very much, Pak Usman, for that really thorough response. Rafaela, I hope that's helpful. I think the message is when the house is on fire, don't concentrate too much on the garden. And there's room in Pak Usman's living room. So we have a couple more questions here, which are open for the whole panel. Pak Nadia, you might want to answer some of these. We don't want to let you off the hook too much there. Question from Bramantio and from another anonymous attendee. I'll try and roll them together because they're both on the same topic. In the lead up to the recent election, Prabowo helped figures closely associated with Jokowi, which could be seen as an effort to continue certain aspects of Jokowi's political legacy. The collaboration suggests a strong alliance, but also raises questions about the balance of influence and potential changes in leadership dynamics. How do you perceive Jokowi's influence over Prabowo's administration in the future? Will this collaboration foster a seamless policy transition, or might differing leadership styles and priorities lead to potential tensions? And then the other question from another anonymous attendee follows from that. There's a kind of similarity, they say, between Prabowo Gibran and Marcos Sara in the Philippines. What's your opinion on this? It would be interesting to know from a psychological and political studies perspective. It certainly would. So there you go, panel. Who would like to answer those two issues about Jokowi and Prabowo in the future?
Maybe I can start, Pak Tim.
Thank you, Pak Nadia, please.
Yep. So I think one of the key indicators to see how the coalition of Prabowo and Jokowi could be maintained and sustained is the result of Pilkada election today. So especially in the big cities, like for instance in Jakarta and also in Central Java. So we are going to see what would happen with elections. I think it's too soon to tell, but I believe that's the key indicators whether the coalition could be maintained and sustained or not. Then another issue I think that we should consider is up to now, Jokowi and Gibran, they do not belong to any political party, and then this will limit Gibran's ability as a vice president to make a lobbying to the parliament and to other political parties. There is, of course, there was an attempt from Jokowi's side to have more influence with Golkar, for instance, with Bahlil. But again, there are many rumors whether Bahlil still has 100% loyalty to Jokowi, or now the loyalty switch to Prabowo. So I think without a support of a big political parties like Golkar, it is hard to imagine how Jokowi and Gibran can maintain their political harmony with Prabowo. PSI, I think it's small political parties with Kaisang, I think it's not enough to support Jokowi and Gibran at the moment. And then if they could not maintain their harmony, then the next question, whether this will lead us to a possibility of Philippines model, whether the conflict between the president and vice president Philippines, I think it is too soon to tell, but the political landscape is different, the context is different, despite the political dynasty could be similar. I think the biggest test before I think in the last 2-3 months is the Fufu Fafa account. When there was a discovery, I don't know, some people say the intelligence played the game, others said that the military, I don't know. I don't believe it is purely from the netizen discovery. There will be some attempt from the government from the internal. But then so far Prabowo did not make any comment on that, and then despite the fact that Fufu Fafa account allegedly belong to Gibran, attack Prabowo's family and also credibility using some negative and harsh words. So we'll see how if there is a conflict in the future, whether Prabowo's camp will revisit what Gibran said or Fufu Fafa said in his social media account. So we'll see what's going on. I think that's from me, Pak Tim, for a start. Maybe Adaru can jump in.
Thanks, Pak Nadia. You've made up for the silence for the great answer. Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to comment on that question?
Yeah, perhaps I just add a very brief answer from Pak Nadir. If we compare between the Astacita and the Nawacita, I don't see there is a big difference between Prabowo vision as well as Jokowi vision. However, what is the big difference among the two person? I think that Prabowo has a very strong leadership and having an outward looking rather than Jokowi. Jokowi seems to inward looking, and we can see from the Prabowo soon after taken office, then he went abroad for almost 3 weeks, visiting a number of important countries according to Prabowo opinion. And surprisingly, the first country he visited is China, and it is there is a controversial statement in regard to the South China Sea, in which in the statement President Prabowo say that Indonesia and China will cooperate, making a cooperation. And again, this received a huge critic, in particular from the law of the sea expert dealing with how come Indonesia will cooperate with China, that Indonesia never recognized the 9-dash claim, and that's one of the big difference between Jokowi and Prabowo. And if Prabowo does not cannot manage his ambition, outward looking ambition, I'm afraid that it would create difficulty among his minister. That's my answer, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susi. I would just note in relation to that there's an unresolved conflict between the joint statement that dealt with the 9-dash line, or rather with the issue in the Natuna Islands that came out of Beijing, the joint statement produced by the two leaders of China and Indonesia, and the statement that was then released soon afterwards by Indonesia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because they don't say the same thing. In fact, they contradict each other in some respects, and that's not resolved. So Indonesia's actual position on China's 9-dash line and cooperation in the Tuna Islands is completely unclear. If you look at the Beijing statement and the Kemlu, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs statement. So it's not really clear where it stands. And maybe that's actually useful for the government to have that sort of ambiguity about its position. But yeah, I agree with you completely. It's whether it's a messy situation that reflects the problems you've identified. Thank you very much, Susi. We have time for a couple more questions. One is that Indonesia is part of the initiator of Open Government Partnership, a global alliance that promotes open, transparent, and accountable government. Since 2011, Indonesia has developed national action plans and received awards from the Open Government Partnership for its achievement in several joint programs created by government and the CSO. Do you think this open government platform will flourish under the Prabowo administration? Would anyone like to answer that question?
Yeah, Tim, I take time to try to answer the question. In line with the outward looking of Prabowo as his style of leadership, I quite believe that Prabowo will encourage Indonesia again to join with other international organizations. But the problem is, what is the consequences? What is the effect of joining such an international organization? But while at the domestic level, as mentioned by Pak Nadir Shah, the bloated cabinet, and because of this bloated cabinet, then once Indonesia join with the new organization or continuing its membership with some of the international organization, what is the effect that should be considered at the domestic? For instance, yes, Indonesia has already joined with the open system government, but again, there is an issue to what extent the transparent government, then the democratic government can give a credit to Indonesia. I don't think so that within the period of 5 years, as Pak Nadir mentioned, that the effective cabinet maybe only for 2 years. So again, that's the question: how to give an effect by joining international organization at the domestic level. I think it's a bit hard to continue the achievement of Indonesia by joining such an organization. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks so much, Susi. And I would just add to that open society and transparency in government is going to be pretty difficult when you have the Kim Plus coalition with over 80% of the DPR under its control and with an enormous cabinet such that there's no real opposition to what government does, given the discretion, particularly the president has about forming ministries and so on. And secondly, that of course, with the new criminal code, the KUHP, coming into force in 2026, which contains provisions that prohibit criticism of government, the president, and state institutions, provisions that were previously rejected by the Constitutional Court. And with the new broadcasting law, with its proposed ban on exclusive broadcasting of investigative journalism content, which would stop broadcasting of investigations, which is broadcast is where most Indonesians get their news after all. So if you have all of those factors in place, it's hard to see how open government can really be meaningful, particularly with the cyber surveillance that Ari has identified being added to that mix. It suggests that membership of that sort of organization could only be symbolic. Thank you very much, Susi, for that. And I think that brings us to the end of our question time. There was one question from Albert, but I think your question has been answered multiple times by presenters. So we will leave it at that. And I would like to hand over now to our Deputy Director of SILIS, Helen Paulsacker to close today's events. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Tim. And it's my pleasure to thank all our speakers today, Pak Usman, Pak Nadir, Ibu Susi, Pak Ari, Ibu Mayang, who've given us, I think, a very in-depth view through all of their presentations. Not optimistic, but I think they've shown us both the black, the white, and the grey in the picture. I wouldn't say it was a coloured picture. That's the one difference. So thank you very much for your talks, and thank you very much to the audience for listening. Okay, and with that, I think we'll close, Tim, unless you had anything further to add.
Special thanks to our Indonesian speakers for allowing their holiday to be interrupted.
Yes.
And to compliment Pak Usman on his excellent driving skills. Which we
yes.
Selamat Tahun Baru sebelumnya.